special guests today. They're missionaries to Peru. They're doing some great work there. This is Marine's daughter and son-in-law, and we're so grateful to have them. Marine Mike.
He was important in that.
They're near and dear to us, and I can't wait to hear that. Can we give them a warm welcome?
Thank you. All right. So, make sure the mic is working here. Did I turn it on right?
Hello.
Awesome.
Hello.
You're playing with it. There we go. Try that.
Hello, hello.
There we go.
Otherwise, I'll just talk real loud.
We can just stand close and share this one.
Okay.
Well, good morning, everyone. I'm Josh, and this is my wife, Nicole. As Mark said, we are missionaries in Peru. I'll just give you a little bit of a background on our ministry so that you're all kind of up to speed on that. What we do in Peru is we work with vulnerable children and families, and actually we work with organizations who work with vulnerable children and families. I lead a Christian alliance of organizations that have all come together, and by organizations I mean could be a children's home, could be churches or different even government children's homes that we work with to change the way that vulnerable children are cared for in Peru. So currently in Peru, a good guess on how many kids it would be about 99% of children that can't be with their biological families live in an orphanage. And what we know from modern social science as well as scripture is that children need families. So when you look at the way that children develop in an orphanage versus in a family, and you can fill in the details on this, for every 3 months that a child lives in a children's home, and this isn't the horror story children's homes, we're talking decent children's homes here, orphanages. For every 3 months they spend in a children's home, they lose 1 month of development. So on average in Peru, a child will live in an orphanage for 10 years. And so that puts them way behind their peers and leaves them with very little hope of integrating back into the community and doing well in life. There are numerous statistics out there, and I'm not going to get into them because for time's sake. Just those children that grow up in those homes, very oftentimes at 18 they must leave. A lot of children's homes can't continue to support children after 18, and then they're put out on their own with very little services or support, and so they end up in prison. They end up being trafficked into sex trafficking or labor traffic. Illegal mining is really big, so a lot of them end up out there into the jungles doing illegal mining, and so it's just not a great outlook for these kids coming out of orphanages. But the alliance that we have, Peru por los Niños, is working to change that in partnership with the local church specifically. God has been doing some absolutely incredible things to see that happen in Peru. You can actually, if you could go to the next slide for me, that'd be great. Oh, missed this. Little geography lesson. So Peru is in South America. It is a Spanish-speaking country, and the population is about 30 million people in Peru. So we'd love to share some more information like that with you at our table in the back after the service or during the wonderful lunch that's prepared. All right, next slide, please. Okay, here we go. So this is our organization, our alliance of organizations called Peru por los Niños. It means Peru for the children. And our statement is, cada niño merece en una familia. That is, every child deserves a family. That's the way God made it. From all the way in Genesis, the very first command was to be fruitful and multiply, to have a family. And we see in Deuteronomy God's command for parents to raise up their children in the way of the Lord. And so we see that family is the original design for discipleship, for raising up the next generation to walk with the Lord. Ooh, that was close. All right, so we are really excited to be able to share some stories of what God has been doing in Peru. That's one thing we are so thankful for, is the opportunity to be a part of what God has been doing in some just overwhelming ways, really. It's I'll turn it over to Nikki to share just one of a story of how God has opened the doors wide for us to be able to influence even Peruvian political policies. So
Sure. Is this person?
just keep talking, they'll turn you up.
Okay. So yeah, like Josh was saying, we're working to see children cared for in families, and you might usually think that missionaries are evangelists, right? Like, aren't you planting a church? Aren't you sharing the gospel that way? But as Josh said, family is an original design for discipleship. So as I'm sure Bart can attest, a lot of parents and families can think, oh, well, the church will disciple my kid. But how many hours a week are children at church? Like, at best, maybe, let's say like 5. There's 168 hours in a week. The majority of those hours, children are going to be with their families. And that's where they're going to repeatedly not just hear about the gospel, but see it lived out. This is the way that they can become followers of Jesus. And, it's interesting because research actually suggests that the ways in which you attach to your parents influences the ways in which you will attach to God. This is a really important thing to keep in mind when we're trying to reach the world for Christ, that it's not just about our evangelistic efforts, but it's really about how we're setting up families to raise up their children to be followers of Christ and warriors for Christ, right? This is really important stuff. So you might be wondering why Christian missionaries are working with the government, right? Well, we were too. We did not go to Peru originally thinking that we would be interacting with the government at all. Our heart is to see Christians and Christian churches equipped to care well for orphans and vulnerable children, and to make sure that they're in family contact. So when we got there, we realized that the government was kind of had this blockade or this boundary where a lot of faith-based organizations were not being given the permission to engage and care for children and families. They could only care for children in orphanages. That was the law. And I remember I was asked to consult with the government on something, so I flew to Lima. I'm in there, and this woman comes in and she says, how can we get these Christian organizations to go away? And I said, well, they care for 70% of your kids, so you probably shouldn't do that. You're going to need to learn to work together with them. But it's been a really hard thing to develop good relationships with the government because we've been there for almost 6 years. There have been 7 presidents in that time. There have been 20 ministers. So this is like the national level cabinet. So think of like equal to like the Secretary of State or something that we would have in the United States. But this is a government department that is in charge of all care for orphan and vulnerable children. Had more than 20 ministers. We kind of stopped counting, to be honest, because there was so much turnover. So in order to make change, you have to make relationships. You have to build trust. But if you're getting a new person in charge every 2 to 3 months, it's really difficult to make that happen. So we didn't know what was going to happen with that. We knew that we needed to help them with changing some legal structures and policies to make Christian care for kids possible. And we just were kind of plodding away and asking God to do what he was going to do. We're just there joining him. Like, he's doing his thing, we're just coming along, and kind of trying to be hands and feet in small ways. And interestingly, we were invited to go to a conference in 2020 and couldn't go in 2020 for obvious reasons. And 2021 happened and we had our little babe who's somewhere. And so we couldn't go again. And in 2022, we finally go, and it was God's perfect timing because there was a woman that had never been there before. She had also come from Peru, actually 2 women. And while I was giving a presentation, Josh was meeting with them in a back room about Peru for Latinos. They got really excited about it, and they wanted to be involved. So he said, hey, we're going to have a conference coming up. Would you be willing to come and speak? And they both said, yes, absolutely. So imagine our surprise when 2 months later, one of those women, Nancy, was named the ministra, the person in charge of all care for vulnerable children in Peru. And we knew that she was a believer and that she loved what we were doing. So this is good news, right? And of course we were like, okay, she's gonna be there for 5 minutes like everyone else. She's actually been there for more than a year. But Josh called her and said, you know, I know you committed to this conference. I know you're probably really busy. Any chance you still want to come? And she said, yes, definitely I want to come. I committed to, I said yes, so I'm gonna be there. And we were both like, okay. And then there were these immense protests. So there was a coup between the time that she was put in office and when the conference happened. And as a result of this coup, there were a lot of protests. They took over our airport, they burned our airport, and it was a really, really volatile time. So she said she was going to come, but we knew the likelihood of her actually being able to be there just from a security standpoint was pretty limited, and we couldn't tell anyone that she was coming to the conference. So literally, like the day of, it's still a question, is she going to come, is she not? And she did. And the guy who was standing at the MC of the conference, thank goodness he was a pastor. He's very used to managing a crowd. So he's like praying and talking and praying and talking. And I'm sure everyone was like, when is he going to be done? But we were just waiting on her to get there. And so he kind of gets to the point where he introduces her and the back doors open up and it's all very dramatic. And she came in, and can we do the next slide, please?
Yes, please.
This is from the MINT, that department, the government Twitter account. This is a picture of a bunch of leadership from Peru por los Niños and Nancy. And at that conference, she made the official announcement that the government would be working with Christian organizations. And she acknowledged that there was no way that they would be able to make change for children and families unless they were supported by Christian organizations. Huge deal. Also at that conference, it was officially announced that the government had made a relationship with one of our partners to officially start the first Christian foster care in Peru, which is an amazing answer to prayer after many years.
A 2-year process of working with the organization, working with the government, trying to get everything to line up so that this organization would be allowed to run foster care, only recruiting through the church.
And for the 3 years before that, working with that organization,
yes,
who want to do foster care. So it is starting, and the tide is turning slowly, little bit by little bit. But then something else really interesting happened where we had created some courses, some Christian child welfare courses to teach people how to care well for orphan and vulnerable children. And there had been a little bit of talk of, would the government want to launch one of those specific to case management? And it was a great idea, but this was before the pandemic. And it just kind of died off, right? Like this was not going to be a priority. So imagine our surprise when a few months later, we were getting ready to travel to Lima for another ministry event, when we get a call, and Nancy, again, wants to launch 8 courses through the Peruvian government. And we've been kind of talking about it, but there were several things in these courses. They point almost exclusively to Christian resources, like linking to Christian resources. There's like gospel language. I mean, it's not like overly explicit, but lots of things like God sets the lonely in families, and God wills for children to be in families. That's His design. Just like simple truths, right? And there was a little bit of pushback, not from her, but from some of the others in the department, where they said, this is really religious. Can we take some of this out? And, there were a couple of points where we were like, we could flex, but a lot of it, we said, no, this is really inherent to the course itself, that people would be understanding these inherent truths about the way that the world has been made and the way God created things. And so actually the government launched 8 of those courses, and I don't know how many people have taken them now. Well over 2,500, I think upwards of 3,000 have taken these courses where the government has said, you should take these child welfare courses to improve your skills, and at the same time understand gospel messages. So that's something that only God could do. We could never have orchestrated that, but He is moving powerfully to share the gospel through child welfare and through skills development in ways we couldn't do.
Yeah, if we could get the next picture up. This is at that national launch where Nikki did an excellent job of sharing on live Peruvian television to the whole country.
I have
in Spanish.
So the story is that they said, oh, we're going to do this launch. And we've been to the government offices many times before, and it was always closed doors meetings with like 16 people. And so I prepared this little 5-minute thing in Spanish, but it's like professional level Spanish, right? I don't usually speak that. And we got in there, and there were these cameras. And so I turned to my friend next to me, I was like, what's going on? And she said, oh yeah, this is on live national television. Yeah, so the entirety of Peru got to see me mess up my Spanish, I'm sure.
She did very well. And so it was just so amazing for us, as we said, like we went to Peru because we saw a need for families to be strengthened. And God called us to gather around other organizations who really felt isolated in that call. Every single organization that is now a member of Peru por los Niños, when I first met with them, like either they're like, that's a great idea, but that's never going to work. It can't work in Peru. We're too messed up in Peru. Or they said, I thought I was the only one in the whole country that was doing this kind of work. And so they felt really isolated and alone, and some of them were even on the edge of giving up. But God has been able to bring them together to encourage them. We meet regularly now, and it's just been really cool to see God work in their hearts, and then also just the doors he's opened up, like into the national government, like into the state Supreme Court in our region, to be able to influence the way that children are processed and to make sure that everybody knows who the people are that are going to care for these kids. And that's the church. That's the body of Christ. Go to the next slide, please. And that's just what I want to share next, is a story of a woman that we've been working with for a while. And when we first moved into this ministry, I was just calling every organization I could find on Google, honestly, and saying, hey, I see you work with children. I'd love to get together with you and hear more about your work and see how we could work together. And I came across this organization, and I scheduled a meeting with their director, and afterward I was talking with someone else, and they're asking, what's going on? What are you doing? I'm like, oh, I'm meeting with so-and-so next week. And they're like, oh, no. And I say, oh, no. What's oh, no? And they proceed to tell me, well, that children's home is the biggest and best in all of Arequipa. And their director will never go for your idea. In fact, she wants to run you out of town because she's heard about the work you're doing and she thinks you're going to mess everything up. And so I'm sweating at this point. I had just gotten out of my language courses in Spanish. So I'm like, okay, I'm going to have this debate in Spanish and defend myself. And I was just sweating about it. And so, but I kept praying. I said, God, is this a meeting you want me to have? And very clearly he said, yes, you need to go talk to this person. And so I went and sit down, and in walks the director with 5 people from her team. And so now I'm like, oh great, now I'm outnumbered too. And she's a tough cookie. And so she sits down across the table from me and she says, Josh, I have heard about you. And I think the work that you guys are trying to do here is amazing, and I want to do everything in my power to make sure you succeed. So I said, oh really? Can you tell me more about that? And she had gone to a conference the week before. And at that conference, they talked about just what I shared at the beginning of how children who grow up in orphanages have worse outcomes than children who grow up in families. And she's like, I don't want that for the kids that I care for. I want these kids to be able to have successful, full lives. And she's not a believer. She wasn't a believer at the time. And so literally at our first meeting, she pulls out an entire notebook of notes on how we're going to make that happen. We're going to have 100 families by the end of the year and all this. I was so blown. I hadn't prepared for that conversation. And so, but it was just great to see how God had moved in her heart. And so she's the one that got us into the governor's office. She opened up the doors into the Supreme Court. She's the one that has just gotten us in touch with so many local government agencies and other organizations, and just really been a door opener for the ministry. She, like I said, was not a believer at the time. And I'll never forget one of our first meetings. We go to the governor's office, and we're scheduled to sit down with the guy, I don't know what it would be called, but the guy just under him. Yeah, the one that does all the work while the governor's out doing all the talking. And so we sit down with him, share this idea, the vision that children need families. You know, we want to work with getting children moved out of orphanages, and the governor, the gentleman asked the question, this is all fine and good, but I don't know a Peruvian who's going to care for a child that's not their blood. And I was prepared for that question, and so I was about to start in with how, well, there's this group of people, and they're called to love, and before I could even open my mouth, this woman who had arranged the meeting, who was completely opposed to family-based care, speaks up and she says, you know, sir, there's this group of people in the world, and they have this love that I don't understand, but they love people just because that's part of who they are. And she was talking about us, the church. And so this non-believing woman was already seeing it. She was already seeing how people like you, all sitting here, have this love inside of you from Jesus, from the Holy Spirit. And it makes the world wonder about us. But they know it's there. They see it. As Jesus said, they'll know you're my disciples by your love. And that's what this woman was seeing. So moving forward, she was involved in all of our trainings and events and helped get things organized. We had planned an event for 30 people, and because of her invitations, we had over 300 people that showed up. And just the passion that this woman has for children is really inspiring. And so the pandemic hits, things kind of get put on hold, and we're able to put together a course for organizations interested in moving towards family-based care. So whether that's family strengthening, which is helping a family stay together. We talked about family reintegration, which is once a child has needed to be removed from the care of their parents, we're able to work with the family to get them back together. All sorts of different options here. And at the end of this course, we asked all the participants to share just what was your one takeaway from the last 18 months of meeting regularly. And this woman was part of it, and she gets on, and she says, this course, I've learned things in this course I never even knew existed. And this has transformed the way that we're even caring for children within our children's home. And then she said, but the thing that our team talks about in our meetings every single week is the love that we see in you guys, in the organizations that have been putting on this training. And she said, we want to hear more about that. And so I had an open door to share the gospel with them. And I wish in that moment I could say they all prayed the prayer and they all got saved. But I believe in that moment something changed. Because this director started talking about us who love. Those that follow Jesus who love us. She started identifying herself as part of the body of Christ. And she has, her story continues, and it's been quite the journey for her. We see where Satan has tried to pick that seed of hope, that seed of the gospel from her life as well. Because during the pandemic, I won't get into too many details, but they had 2 murders that happened in their children's home. And one of them was on video, and it was of a little girl that was like a daughter to her. And she saw it happen. And God taught me a lot through the rest of this experience I'm going to share. I started just checking in with her because I knew she was falling apart. And I knew that what Satan was up to. And so I was messaging with her regularly. How are you doing? How can we be praying for you? Hey, this is what we prayed for you recently. And one day out of the blue, my phone just starts dinging with messages, like 40 different messages, just bing, 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 bing. And like, who's dying? What happened? The world is falling apart. And I get to my phone and I check it, and it's Bible verses from this director. Bible verse after Bible verse after Bible verse after, like, I couldn't scroll fast enough. And every single one of them was about forgiveness. It was about how God forgives us, about how he calls us to forgive others. And at the end of this long string of Bible verses about forgiveness, she says, Josh, I don't know how, but I know God wants me to forgive this woman for what she did to my daughter. And she says, because of the love that he has for me, I know I can. So here's a woman, 2 years prior, was completely opposed to family-based care, completely unaware of the gospel, witnesses the murder of a girl who's like a daughter to her, and she's willing to forgive. And I have to admit, in that moment, I was like, she's a better Christian than me. I don't think I could do that. But God is powerful. And God transforms things. He transforms us. And through that love, that forgiveness, he transforms the world. And not only in Peru, but here in Albert Lee, through you guys. Because you guys are part of this story too. You guys are that presence of love here in Albert Lee. That presence of hope and joy in trials. And you're part of it in Peru. You're part of every one of these stories, every moment of it, because you guys have partnered with what God is doing there. And we are so, so grateful. We couldn't do it without you. Without your prayers, your support, just checking in with us, inviting us when we come to visit. We're so excited for more Thanksgiving food. And we are so grateful for your partnership and just the work that we get to be a part of. So what's next? What are the next doors that we see God opening up? Well, first, actually, is there anything you'd want to share? All right. She says, no, they want to go eat.
Just looking out for you all. Just looking out for you.
So what's next? So a big thing that we've learned is that in Peru, having an officially recognized nonprofit organization is really important, especially in some of the work we're doing. God's opened up a door for us to be able to sign what would be like a memorandum of understanding between our alliance of organizations and one of the largest Protestant denominations in Peru. They have over 800 congregations across the country. And they want to work with us to get this message of the need for families into every one of their churches. But in order for them to do that on an official capacity, our organization has to become registered. So that's a big step for us. So please be praying for that. There's just all kinds of ins and outs once you start dealing with the legal system in Peru and getting registered. So please pray. And then in March, we will be hosting an international conference in Lima, so the capital. It's a conference that happens every year, and it draws between 600 and 800 people from across Spanish-speaking Americas. So think Texas border south. And so we're really privileged to be able to host that conference in Lima, gathering not only people from Peru, but also networking and connecting with people from across the region to learn more and to share about what God is doing to care for vulnerable children in the area. And then the last thing we'd appreciate your prayers for is just recruiting the church, talking with churches and getting them more deeply involved. So there's just a great heart for vulnerable children, but there's a lack of knowledge on how. And so we really just ask you to pray with us as we talk with pastors and ministry teams about what the church in Peru can be doing for these kids. And then I just want to invite you all, if you don't get our newsletter, we would love for you to be following along. We'd love more prayers. And if you want to hear about how to get signed up, you can come back to the table and we can get you signed up for our newsletter. And if anybody's interested in partnering with us personally, we'd also love to talk with you more about that. And I just want to close by just saying thank you once again so much for what you are doing to partner with God in Peru. We're so grateful today for you. Thank you.